Ida for setting my wedding date for a week. My BIL doesn't have custody of his kids? My sister got married last year, and it has been nothing short of a catastrophic mess of unparalleled proportions. When she said I do, it wasn't just to her husband, but to the whirlwind chaos of his past life. He came with baggage: 2 kids, aged 7 and 11, from a previous marriage, and a bitter ex-wife who seemed to have made it her mission to ensure that peace and happiness would never find a home in their lives. From the moment they tied the knot, tension seeped into every corner of their existence. My sister, who once radiated optimism and energy, now finds herself navigating a domestic battleground. The kids are, quite predictably, the pawns in this twisted game orchestrated by their mother. Through her influence, they have come to despise my sister not for who she is, but simply because of her connection to their father. To them, she represents a usurper, an intruder in the fragile remnants of their family. The contempt they harbor for her extends beyond her alone. It touches everyone connected to her, including us. Our family, her family, is now seen as the enemy. Even their own aunt, who has grown close to my sister over the past year, has not been spared from their disdain. The kids, fueled by the toxic environment their mother perpetuates, have mastered the art of defiance. They are rude and disrespectful, throwing tantrums that can turn even the calmest of days into a tempest. What's particularly exhausting is that only their father has any sway over them. When he intervenes, they grudgingly simmer down, but the moment anyone else tries to set boundaries or discipline them, their reaction is to completely ignore us, as though we are invisible. It's hard to blame them entirely. After all, they're children trapped in the crossfire of adult conflict. But their behavior is draining, and my sister bears the brunt of it. Adding to the turbulence, my sister recently found out she's pregnant. One might think that such news would bring a glimmer of hope, a sense of renewal in the midst of the storm. But in this case, her pregnancy has only amplified the chaos. The kids, already resistant to accepting her, now see her growing family as a further encroachment on their lives. Their animosity festers and deepens, and their mother, the ex-wife, exacerbates the situation at every turn. This woman, their mother, is a force of chaos unlike any I've ever encountered. To call her insane almost feels like an understatement. Her vendetta against my sister began long before the wedding, and her antics have only escalated since then. She has become a constant, unwelcome presence in our lives, a shadow looming over every event, every celebration. Her intrusion is relentless, and her influence over the children is undeniable. My sister's wedding day, which should have been a celebration of love and new beginnings, was instead marred by the ex-wife's theatrics. She crashed the wedding, making a scene so dramatic it could have been ripped straight out of a soap opera. She demanded to take her children home, despite it being their father's scheduled time with them. The situation escalated to the point where security had to intervene. It was a spectacle, a humiliating disruption that left my sister in tears and set the tone for what would become her new normal. But the ex-wife's meddling didn't stop there. A few weeks later, she appeared uninvited at a family party hosted at our home. Once again, she insisted that her children didn't belong there, that they were being forced into a hostile environment. Her shouting echoed through the neighborhood, drawing the attention of our neighbors and leaving us all feeling embarrassed and powerless. As if that weren't enough, she repeated the performance at a cousin's birthday party. This time, she didn't even bother to come inside. Instead, she stood outside the venue, yelling insults from a distance like some deranged protester. The kids, torn between their loyalty to their mother and their father, were caught in the middle. Predictably, they wanted to leave with her, which sparked yet another heated argument. The trouble didn't start with the wedding, though. The ex-wife's disruptive behavior had been a constant in my brother-in-law's life for years. Even before my sister came into the picture, this woman had been a thorn in his side. Her hostility extended to anyone who tried to build a relationship with him. My sister wasn't the first woman to face her wrath. I later learned that the ex-wife's craziness had driven away another woman he dated after their divorce. That relationship ended not because of a lack of love or compatibility, but because the ex-wife made it impossible for them to have any semblance of a normal life. My sister knew about this history before marrying him, and yet she chose to proceed, thinking perhaps that things would be different for her. They weren't. The ex-wife's obsessive interference is targeted and strategic. She doesn't bother my brother-in-law's side of the family. Her vendetta is solely against my sister and anyone closely associated with her. She cannot stand the idea of her children becoming part of another family, of them forging bonds with another maternal figure. It's not about the kids' well-being, it's about control, about asserting dominance in a situation where she feels she's losing her grip. Despite all of this, my brother-in-law has tried to take the high road. He's gone to court multiple times, armed with evidence of her erratic behavior, her harassment, and her refusal to respect boundaries. He hoped that the legal system would step in, that a judge would see reason and take action to protect his family from her relentless intrusions. But each time, the result has been the same: a warning. No change in custody, no tangible consequences for her actions. The lack of accountability has emboldened her, and she continues to show up uninvited, causing scenes and disrupting our lives. Then came the cousin's birthday party, an event meant for joy and celebration, which instead became a flashpoint for more conflict. This time, she didn't even bother to come inside. She planted herself outside the venue, shouting insults and accusations from a distance. Her voice carried through the air, drawing stares from strangers and casting a shadow over what should have been a happy occasion. The children, understandably confused and torn, gravitated toward her, pleading to leave with her. What began as a festive gathering quickly devolved into a shouting match as their father tried to explain why they needed to stay, only for her to escalate matters further. It was exhausting, humiliating, and emotionally draining for everyone involved. And these are only the incidents we can recount in detail. The truth is, there's an entire backlog of similar disruptions and episodes that took place before the wedding, a laundry list of chaos too long and convoluted to fully document. Each event adds another layer of strain to my sister's life, another crack in the fragile foundation of her new family. My brother-in-law, to his credit, has tried to take legal action to put an end to this madness. Armed with a mountain of evidence, he brought her behavior to the court's attention, hoping that the system would intervene. Photos, videos, and witness testimonies were presented, each one painting a clear picture of her incessant harassment and inability to respect boundaries. The goal was simple: to either curb her disruptive actions or change the custody arrangement to limit her ability to interfere. But the legal system, as frustratingly flawed as it often is, offered little in the way of relief. All she received was a slap on the wrist, a warning that amounted to nothing. There was no custody change, no meaningful consequences, nothing to deter her from continuing down this destructive path. And so, emboldened by the lack of accountability, she resumed her antics with even greater fervor. It soon became clear how she managed to time her intrusions so perfectly. The children, perhaps unknowingly or maybe even at her encouragement, were feeding her information about every family plan, every event, every gathering where they would be present. What initially seemed like uncanny timing on her part was revealed to be a calculated effort to monitor and sabotage any attempts at fostering normalcy or connection within my sister's new family. She objected not only to my sister but to the idea of her children spending time with anyone even remotely connected to her ORR family. This knowledge stung. It added a layer of betrayal to an already complicated situation. My sister was not only dealing with the open hostility of the ex-wife but also the quiet undermining of the children she was trying so desperately to build a relationship with. Their actions weren't malicious, they were simply caught in the crossfire, likely trying to navigate the impossible task of pleasing two opposing forces. Still, the result was the same: more disruption, more heartbreak, more strain. Through it all, my sister has tried to remain strong. But the cracks are beginning to show. The stress is taking a toll on her, both emotionally and physically. Her pregnancy, which should be a time of joy and anticipation, has become overshadowed by the constant barrage of conflict. She worries about the impact this environment will have on her unborn child, about the kind of world she's bringing them into. The weight of it all is suffocating. My brother-in-law, too, is reaching his breaking point. He loves his children and wants to protect them, but he is also fiercely protective of my sister and their unborn child. The constant tug-of-war between these responsibilities is wearing him down. Every court hearing, every confrontation, every emotional outburst chips away at his resolve. He feels powerless against an ex-wife who seems untouchable, backed by a system that refuses to hold her accountable. As a family, we have tried to rally around my sister, to support her in whatever ways we can. But there's only so much we can do. The ex-wife's reach is far and invasive, her determination to disrupt unyielding. She has created an atmosphere of tension and unease that permeates every gathering, every conversation. It's exhausting, maddening, and deeply unfair. At the core of it all, the children remain the most tragic figures in this story. They are being weaponized in a battle they never asked to be part of, their loyalty pulled in conflicting directions. They are the innocent casualties of an adult war, their childhood marred by bitterness and resentment. It's hard to watch them struggle, to see the confusion and hurt in their eyes. They deserve better than this, but the path to giving them that seems impossibly tangled. And so, the cycle continues. The ex-wife's interference remains a constant, her influence over the children unbroken. The legal system offers no relief, leaving my sister and her husband to navigate this storm largely on their own. Every step forward is met with resistance, every attempt at peace met with chaos. The question of how long this can go on lingers heavily over us all, a shadow that refuses to lift. For now, all we can do is brace ourselves for the next confrontation, knowing it's only a matter of time before the ex-wife strikes again. And yet, my sister had known all of this and chosen to marry him anyway. She believed in him, in their future together, and thought that perhaps their love would be strong enough to withstand the storm. But love, no matter how resilient, is not a shield against a force as destructive as his ex-wife. My sister hadn't just married him, she had stepped into a battlefield where the rules were dictated by a woman who refused to let go. What became abundantly clear over time was that the ex-wife's anger was never really about him. It wasn't even about my sister. Her obsession was rooted in her children, or more specifically, in her twisted idea of what their lives should look like. She couldn't tolerate the thought of them forming bonds with another woman, of them integrating into another family, of them experiencing love and stability outside the confines of her influence. It wasn't just jealousy, it was control. To her, my sister represented a threat to her role in her children's lives, and she was determined to erase that threat at all costs. Christmas that year was meant to be a moment of respite, a rare opportunity for joy amidst the chaos. My brother-in-law had custody of the kids for the holiday, and he and my sister decided to host a gathering at their home, inviting both sides of their extended families. It was a chance to create happy memories, to show the children that they were surrounded by love and support from all directions. The house was decorated beautifully, with twinkling lights, a towering Christmas tree, and the scent of cinnamon and pine wafting through the air. For a brief moment, it felt like a semblance of peace might actually be possible. But peace, as we had learned, was never something we could count on when his ex-wife was involved. She showed up, uninvited and unrelenting, just as the festivities were in full swing. Her arrival was like a wrecking ball crashing through the carefully constructed facade of normalcy. She stormed into the house with the ferocity of someone who believed she was entitled to be there, shouting about how her children shouldn't be forced to spend Christmas with strangers and traitors. Her accusations were as sharp as they were baseless, each one aimed at undermining the fragile sense of unity my sister and her husband had worked so hard to create. The children, already on edge from the constant tug-of-war between their parents, were visibly distressed. They clung to her, looking to her for guidance even as her behavior spiraled further out of control. The tension in the room was unbearable. My sister tried to remain calm, to defuse the situation with measured words, but it was like trying to extinguish a wildfire with a glass of water. The ex-wife's fury only escalated, her voice rising to a fever pitch as she hurled insults and accusations at anyone who dared to meet her gaze. It wasn't long before the police were called again. By now, this had become a grim routine, an almost expected conclusion to any event involving my sister and her husband. The officers arrived, their expressions a mixture of professionalism and thinly veiled exasperation. They escorted her out, but not before she delivered one final parting shot, a venomous declaration that this wasn't over and that she would protect her children from the toxic environment my sister and her family represented. As the door closed behind her and the sound of her protests faded into the distance, the weight of her presence lingered. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with unspoken words and barely contained emotions. The children were inconsolable, torn between their loyalty to their mother and the confusion of witnessing her behavior. My sister, though outwardly composed, was clearly shaken. Her husband tried to comfort her, but his own frustration and helplessness were evident. This was their reality, their new normal, and there seemed to be no end in sight. In the days that followed, the fallout from her actions rippled through their lives. My brother-in-law, once again, took her to court, armed with evidence of her repeated harassment and the emotional toll it was taking on his family. He presented photos, videos, and police reports, each one a testament to her unrelenting campaign of disruption. He hoped that this time, the court would see reason, that they would recognize the damage she was causing and take decisive action. But, as before, the outcome was maddeningly inadequate. She received another warning, a meaningless gesture that did nothing to curb her behavior or address the root of the problem. There was no change in custody, no restrictions placed on her access to the children, no consequences that might deter her from continuing down this destructive path. It was as though the system itself was enabling her, allowing her to wield her chaos unchecked. The frustration was palpable. How many more times would they have to endure this? How many more warnings would it take before someone stepped in to put an end to her reign of terror? The lack of accountability was a bitter pill to swallow, one that left my sister and her husband feeling powerless in the face of an adversary who seemed untouchable. In the aftermath of the court hearing, my sister confided in me that she was beginning to question everything. She loved her husband and believed in their marriage, but the constant strain was taking its toll. She worried about the impact it was having on her pregnancy, about the environment they were bringing their child into. She wondered if she had made a mistake, if the love she and her husband shared was enough to weather the storm. It was a heartbreaking admission, one that spoke to the depth of her despair. As her sibling, I felt a mixture of anger and helplessness. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the chaos that had consumed her life, but there was only so much I could do. The ex-wife's reach was far and insidious, her influence over the children unwavering. Every step my sister and her husband took to build a life together was met with resistance, every moment of happiness overshadowed by the looming threat of her interference. And yet, despite everything, my sister refused to give up. She was determined to fight for her family, to create a life where love and stability could flourish despite the chaos. It was a testament to her strength and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of relentless adversity, she would not be broken. The path ahead was uncertain, the challenges daunting, but one thing was clear, this story was far from over. The ex-wife's campaign of disruption would continue, but so too would my sister's fight to protect the life she had worked so hard to build. It was a battle of wills, a clash between chaos and resilience, and the outcome was yet to be determined. All we could do was brace ourselves for what was to come, knowing that the fight for peace and happiness would be a long and arduous journey. The engagement was supposed to be a blissful time, a season of planning and dreaming about the future with my fiancé. All she wanted was a summer wedding, a day to celebrate our love surrounded by family and friends under the warm glow of the sun. But in the back of my mind, a gnawing anxiety lurked. I couldn't ignore the shadow that had loomed over every family gathering since my sister's marriage, the specter of my brother-in-law's ex-wife. Her propensity for chaos was unmatched, and I knew with certainty that she would seize any opportunity to disrupt my wedding day if given the chance. It wasn't just a possibility, It was almost a guarantee. When we chose the date, it wasn't arbitrary. We carefully picked a week when my brother-in-law wouldn't have his kids, deliberately aiming for a window where his ex-wife would have no reason to involve herself. It felt like the safest way to avoid her interference, to ensure that our wedding wouldn't become yet another battlefield in her ongoing war. Of course, we didn't announce this reasoning when we shared the date with family. It wasn't a detail we wanted to broadcast, it was simply a precaution, a safeguard against an all-too predictable disaster. But it didn't take long for my sister and brother-in-law to piece it together. When they realized the timing coincided with his off week from custody, their reaction was immediate and pointed. They were annoyed, to say the least. My sister, who had already been navigating her own storm of personal and familial drama, saw our decision as a slight, an exclusion of her stepchildren. In her eyes, it was as though we had deliberately left out two young members of the family. Her accusation stung, even though we hadn't intended it that way. We tried to explain ourselves gently, saying that the date was set and couldn't be changed. We hoped they would still come, that they would understand the delicate balancing act we were trying to manage. But my sister's heart lingered, and the tension between us grew. It wasn't just about the date, it was a culmination of everything, a reflection of the fractures that had formed in our family over the past year. As the weeks passed and the wedding plans began to take shape, the unease between us remained. My sister's frustration bubbled beneath the surface, simmering in the spaces between our conversations. She saw our decision as yet another instance of her family being sidelined, another way the world seemed to conspire against her. Her pregnancy only heightened her sensitivity, and I struggled to navigate the minefield of her emotions. Meanwhile, my brother-in-law seemed torn between supporting her and recognizing the practicality of our decision. It was a mess, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as the wedding day approached. The final straw came a few weeks before the wedding. My sister, in a rare moment of candor, confessed that she wasn't sure if they would attend. The logistics of leaving her stepchildren behind during his off week, coupled with her lingering resentment over the perceived exclusion, made her hesitate. She didn't explicitly say she blamed me, but the implication was clear. It felt like a gut punch, a reminder that the ripple effects of her chaotic home life had reached into yet another corner of my life. When the wedding day finally arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. I should have been focused on my fiancé, on the joy of marrying the love of my life. But instead, I found myself scanning the crowd, wondering if my sister and brother-in-law would show up. To my immense relief, they did. My sister, visibly pregnant, walked in with my brother-in-law by her side. For a moment, it felt like a truce had been called, a ceasefire in the ongoing conflict that had overshadowed so much of our family's life. The ceremony itself was beautiful, a perfect reflection of everything my fiancé and I had envisioned. The sun shone brightly, the vows were heartfelt, and for a few blissful hours, the weight of the past year seemed to lift. Even my sister seemed to relax, her usual tension replaced by a soft smile as she watched us exchange our promises. It felt like a turning point, a moment of peace amidst the chaos. But peace, as I had learned, was always fleeting in our family. As the reception began and the champagne flowed, I couldn't help but feel the undercurrent of tension creeping back in. My sister's smile faltered as the evening wore on, her discomfort becoming more apparent. It wasn't long before she and my brother-in-law made their excuses and left early, citing her pregnancy and the need to rest. It was a bittersweet departure, a reminder that the fractures in our family were far from healed. In the weeks that followed, the fallout from the wedding lingered. My sister and I spoke less frequently, our conversations tinged with an awkwardness that hadn't been there before. She still harbored resentment over the date, even if she didn't say it outright. My brother-in-law, too, seemed distant, his usual warmth replaced by a cautious reserve. It was clear that the wedding, while beautiful, hadn't mended the rift between us. If anything, it had deepened it. The reality was that the issues within our family ran far deeper than a single wedding date. My sister's marriage, her pregnancy, her stepchildren, and the ever-present specter of her husband's ex-wife had created a storm that none of us could escape. Every decision, no matter how well-intentioned, seemed to add fuel to the fire. And while I didn't regret choosing a date that minimized the risk of disruption, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for the way it had affected my sister. As time passed, I came to accept that there were no easy answers, no simple resolutions to the tangled web of conflicts that had ensnared our family. My sister would continue to navigate her own challenges, and I would support her as best I could, even if our relationship remained strained. The ex-wife would undoubtedly continue her campaign of chaos, and my brother-in-law would keep fighting to protect his family. And I, newly married and hopeful for the future, would do my best to build a life untouched by the shadows of their drama. In the end, the wedding was a reminder that love, while powerful, is not always enough to overcome the complexities of family dynamics. It's a foundation, a starting point, but it takes effort, understanding, and compromise to truly build something lasting. And while our family had weathered its fair share of storms, it was clear that the road ahead would be far from easy. Still, I held on to hope that with time, patience, and a little grace, we might find our way back to each other, stronger for having endured the trials that tested us.